for those who are called according to his purpose. So today I'm talking about something that we've all experienced in our life, sometimes more than once, is catastrophes. Okay, it's there. Okay. And a catastrophe, a lot of people just refer to catastrophes as, that's something that's really bad that's happened. Well, it's a little bit more than that. Catastrophe in the dictionary is an event causing a great and often sudden damage or sufferings, a disaster. Another way you can put it is that a catastrophe is when everything is going well in your life. Perfect, hunky-dory, well. But then one thing happens, and it could be a small thing, it could be a big thing, but one thing happens and it ruins everything completely. Have you ever had that where everything's going fine and one thing happens and everything just falls apart? That's a catastrophe. There's this famous Christian comedian named Mark Lowry, and one of his examples, he described Christian's life as interesting. He didn't say everything's great when you're Christian, he didn't say everything's bad, he just said it's interesting. He basically described it, and these are his actual motions he did, because he's a very animated fellow. He says a normal person's, unsaved person's life has ups and downs like this. Steady like this. He says a saved person's life, their ups and downs are like this. Right there. It's true right there. And when the catastrophes happen, what do we normally do? And in all honesty, and what we do is that we usually end up forgetting about God's blessings and provisions. And that actually adds on to the catastrophe. Going back to Exodus there's the Hebrews traveling through the desert there, and it seems like, every other chapter, they're complaining about Moses about something. Either, they're stuck at the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army's coming through, or they're running out of food and water, or, they're lost, or Moses is on top of Mount Sinai and they think they're abandoning them. Everything they're like, oh, we're gonna die. Then God, helps them out. Then, next chapter comes up, oh, we're gonna die again. And no, God helps them out again. And, we kind of like scoff at them, laugh at themselves, silly Hebrews. They don't understand God's blessing. They're not holding true to the faith, or they're doubting. But, honestly, how often are we like that? Especially when the catastrophe hits us. Honestly, I'm sure, sometimes we stay strong, but other times we're like, oh God, what are you doing? There's an example. There's this, one of my favorite war movies called Achilles' Heroes. And it's from the early 70s. It stars Clint Eastwood, Donald Sutherland, Telly Savalas, huge all-star, Carol O'Connor is in it. And in the movie, there's this one character that Donald Sutherland plays called Oddball. And he's this pro-hippie guy. Even though it takes place in the 1940s, he's like some hippie character, which is totally, inaccurate, but it's a comedy. You can do whatever you want. And there's this running gag that whenever something goes bad, he goes to one of his subordinates and goes, hey man, it's those negative waves. Stop with those negative waves. And, it's done for a comedic effect, but there's a principle to it. It's that whenever something happens, everybody gets all negative. So let's talk about somebody who had a big catastrophe. And, when you're pulling examples from the Bible, especially when it comes to catastrophes, I could spend all week going through there because the Bible's full of catastrophes in everybody's lives. I'm just going to pull one particular one. It's a famous one. Job. Oh, poor Job. Poor guy. We always bring him up. And I'm going to read, it's 3 slides, it's a long thing here. And this is his catastrophe. Starting in Job 1 at verse 13 through 19. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job, saying, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone escaped to tell you. While he was speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell upon heaven and burned up the sheep and all the servants and consumed them, and I alone escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they're dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. That's a catastrophe right there. And no matter, how bad, I know we've all had our bad catastrophes in life. I mean, I don't think anything we've had really held a candle up to what poor Job went through. And there's one thing to do is like, well, what do we need to remember when we have the catastrophe? How do we handle this? We have to remember one thing. It's that God is always in control. Amen. No matter what. When we pray to Him when a catastrophe happens, we shouldn't ask God, hey, God, can you just take control of everything? Just because, everything's happened, I lost my job at work, my car broke down, my cat died, all in the same day, or whatever. And, just take control of what's going on. And the problem is that we really shouldn't pray that because He already is in control. We should instead ask for His mercy, help, and grace, that's sufficient for our needs there. Years ago, my older brother told me one time there was at this prayer meeting, and it might have been with Hurricane Katrina. I can't remember. It's back in the 2000s. There was a prayer meeting, and somebody started praying, asking God that this hurricane that was heading towards the U.S. coast, that if God would just take control of this hurricane and just guide it to a safe area. And my brother realizes, that's not really the right way you should be praying, because God's already in control of that hurricane. It's going to land where He wants it to land. You should pray for the people there. I'm going to give you a little analogy, a chess analogy. I got this from a movie, I think it's on Netflix, it's called An Interview with God. And in the movie, it's about this Christian journalist who's starting to lose his faith, and he actually sets up an interview with God. And it's actually quite interesting. And at one point, he asks God about predestination versus free will and all that. And God uses the analogy, they're sitting in the park, a city park, and it has one of those little concrete chess tables there. And God sits there and says, it's like a game of chess. Now, in chess, each player can move their pieces freely on the board, but they can't occupy the same space unless they're capturing the other opponent's space. And that's how it is, When it comes to us and God, we're like playing, and not just us, the unbelievers as well, and even the enemy as well. They're all playing against God in a game of chess. And that they can move their pieces freely, but God can move His pieces too. And God's already got everything set up so He wins. Back in the 50s and 60s, there was this one chess guy called Bobby Fischer. Has anybody ever heard Bobby Fischer? A few has. He's actually regarded, that's actually his picture up there, as regarded as the greatest chess player that's ever existed. No one can come close to him. When he started playing competitively when he was only a teenager. When he was 20 years old, and he defeated a grandmaster in only 21 moves. I actually saw somebody did a reenactment with a chessboard showing how he did it and explained each move. It was actually really brilliant how it happened. And what it is that when there's a chess grandmaster, they're so good at chess is that they can anticipate any move you make, and they already have the counter to that move already planned out, so that no matter what you choose, they can move a piece and they always come out on top. There's actually some grandmasters who can actually play multiple people at the same time. They've actually done that, where you'll have a bunch of people lined up, they'll go to one chessboard, you'll move a piece to go to another one, simultaneously, and they're all already in their minds planning it out, and that they come out to win. That's how God is. He's playing against everyone. You and me, the unbelievers, and the enemy, and He's always knows what to do. He's the chess grandmaster. And like I said, He anticipates and counters every move we make so that He always wins. And you might be thinking, says, well, yeah, but we're believers. We're not playing against Him. Well, in all honesty, even though we're believers, there are often times where we're kind of not really on the same page as God. Mm-hmm. We're like, what are you doing, God? What are you doing? And it's that. And, going to a random verse here from Hebrews, is that when disaster strike, Hebrews 4, verse 16, when these catastrophes happen, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Yes. Now, why do we have catastrophes? We should be fine. And there are certainly many reasons. You could actually make up probably a whole sermon on just, why do we have catastrophes? And I'm just going to give a couple reasons. Though we are saved, our bodies are still bound to the law of sin and death. I mean, you have to realize that our bodies right here are just shells. That's not really who we are. This is just a holding tank for us temporarily. They're breaking down. I'm only 37, and my knees are already not where they used to be. I know some of the older folks are just laughing at me and says, "Oh man, I wish I was 37." But there's another reason. I think this is a more important reason. Have you ever met someone? It could be a believer or unbeliever, just someone randomly, somebody you know, or somebody at work, and they just opened up to you and they said, I've struggled with blank, or I've really put up with blank, fill in the blanks, whatever. It says, I just went through this terrible thing. It was blank. And then as they mention it to you, it's like, oh, wait, I went through that too. It's that we can reach the lost because we can relate to them. That's a perfect avenue. Because, let's be honest, if we just go on a street corner and start preaching God's word, and there is a ministry for that, and there's times where a lot of people just automatically just tune us out, shut us right down. Well, if you get an opportunity where someone went through something that's terrible, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, you're preaching to the choir here, I just went through it too, that's a doorway. A door just opened up. And then it's up to us to stick our foot in the door and just go right in there. So that's really catastrophes, right there, what I'm talking about, how we handle them. And, I could end the message right there, but, that is a bit of a downer ending right there, and I'm really not finished yet. Because what happens after the catastrophes? What happens then? There's another thing. There's a part 2 catastrophes. I'm basically talking about all these bad things that happen to you that's going to happen to our lives. If something hasn't happened to you, something will is going to happen to you before. And I'm telling you how to deal with it. But then there's something else that happens after it. The eucatastrophes. Yes, that is a real word. It's the opposite of catastrophes. What is a eucatastrophe, you're asking? It's actually a word coined by Christian writer J.R.R. Tolkien. That's him up there looking all dignified with his pipe and vest on. If you don't know, he wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and he was actually a close friend with the other great Christian writer, C.S. Lewis. And a catastrophe is a sudden favorable resolution of events in a story, or happy ending. And usually the term catastrophes applied to literary stuff, stories, things like that. But it can be applied to our lives as well. And basically, it's when everything's going bad, but then one thing occurs that fixes everything. It's the opposite of the catastrophe. Catastrophe, everything's going good, one thing happens, bad. Eucatastrophe, everything's going bad, one little thing happens, boom. Hey, everything's good again. And that's what happens. As Christians, we have our own eucatastrophes. I want to tell you a story from history. Talk about the Siege of Vienna from 1683. And one thing is that I love history, especially war history. I love all kinds of history except the U.S. Reconstruction era, which is really boring. But I got a few chuckles out of that one. So right now is a map of the Ottoman Empire at 1683. This is the height of the Ottoman Empire. The dark green is the empire itself. The lighter green are its client states, the vassals, the subjects to it, the ones that are basically forced to help out, give tribute and troops and whatever. And circled there, and you can't really see it, but there's a little dot around that red circle. That's the city of Vienna, which is in Austria. And what happens in 1683, the Ottoman Empire decided to, hey, let's conquer Europe and make it all Muslim. And they were going to use Vienna as the staging point of their invasion. The plan was capture Vienna, because it's sort of centrally located in Europe. Then from there, they could use that as their base of operations, send their troops northward, westward, southward, everything. Right there. I'll give you a thing, some details. Ottomans at the Siege of Vienna had about 140,000 troops. The Viennese actually only had a garrison of 16,000 troops. The siege lasted from July 14th to September 11th, 1683. About 59 days. of the siege. What happened on the last day? What happened on September 11th, 1683? The catastrophe happened. So you're like, well, what happened? What changed these events? I mean, you've got this little city here, and mind you, the Turks, the Ottomans, this is the 17th century, gunpowder was in effect. So they weren't using catapults and battering rams and things you see in medieval movies and all that stuff. They had gunpowder, they had cannons. And cannons were known to be pulverizing these ancient city walls, these ancient structures that protected cities for 1,000 years. With cannons, they could blow right through them, no problem. They were also digging underneath the cities to plant barrels of gunpowder so they could blow up the cities right there, the walls right there. What happened was, King John III of Poland led the relief force. There's his mug right there. Go Polish. He charged in, part of the relief force, it was a multinational relief force. Part of it was that he charged in with 20,000 horsemen. It's actually the record of the biggest cavalry charge in history. 3,000 of them were the famous winged hussars. The winged hussars were the elite force back in the day. They were a Polish and Lithuanian heavy knights who, for several centuries, you didn't stand up against these guys. So he led this charge in. There's a picture of the winged hussars right there. And he broke through the Ottoman lines. 20,000 heavy knights charged in, attacked 140,000 there, and smashed into them and broke them apart. What happened after that? The Ottoman Empire retreated, and they never attacked Europe again. And at that point, the Ottoman Empire actually went to a slow decline. And never recovered from that loss. They lost a bunch of territory after that. And they didn't collapse until the 1920s after World War I, but after that happened, they never really recovered. They just slowly went down their hill from there. There's an interesting story, going back even further in history, when Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, which is now modern-day France, he famously said, Veni, Vidi, Vici, which is Latin for, I came, I saw, I conquered, very famous phrase. A lot of people have said that throughout history when they made this one great victory. King John III of Poland paraphrased it. He said something different, and excuse my Latin if I butcher this. He said, Venimus vidimus Deus vidici, which translates as, we came, we saw, God conquered. So let's go back to our buddy Job, because he didn't just have a catastrophe, he had his catastrophe, 42 chapters later. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job. When he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him and in his house. And they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil or misfortune that the Lord has brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money, something he could start with, a seed, and a ring of gold. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. And he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Job held out. He held on to God. And he did have a rough time. If you read the rest of the chapter, I skipped pretty much the whole book there, but if you've ever read through it, it's the other 40-some chapters is just Job having a terrible time. It's not like, oh, he's getting a little bit better, No, it's terrible up until he gets his catastrophe where God steps in and says, I'm here to help. Now, some of you might be asking, where's my catastrophe? I suffered a catastrophe, and it may have been recently, it may have been years ago, and I'm still down in the dumps right here. Where is it? And the answer to that is, it hasn't happened yet. It's coming one way or another. And to be honest, it may not happen in this lifetime. But we will all have our catastrophe. Revelation 21:5 says, and he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. What was whatever wrongs were given to you, whatever catastrophes and disasters you would happen, God will make right. If not in this life, He will in the next. So remember, sin was the ultimate catastrophe. The first really catastrophe was sin in Genesis, with the fruit of the tree there. Whereas Christ is the ultimate eucatastrophe. And I'm going to end with this, the quote from Tolkien himself. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the incarnation. Heather, if you want to come up and just play a verse or a chorus or whatever you want.